All right, welcome back, everyone. We're going to be doing a deep dive today, looking at this document from Lumos LLC about cybersecurity. Now, it's interesting because we all know it's a big deal, but this document, I don't know, it really puts the stakes front and center, for businesses today.
Yeah, it does, and it kind of highlights how much the threat landscape has shifted. It's not just about data being safe anymore, but it's kind of like understanding that security is intertwined with like the whole business operation.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think a lot of people, a lot of business owners, I think maybe they might still view it as just like a tech issue, something they can hand over to their IT department and just wash their hands of it.
Yeah, and that's dangerous thinking, honestly. This document, it makes it really clear that cybersecurity it's strategic, like for any business. If you want to survive, let alone thrive in today's digital world.
Right. So let's get into the nitty-gritty. The document outlines 3 major risks: financial loss, reputation being damaged, and then legal consequences. And it doesn't just mention them, like it gives some pretty specific examples. And I got to say, I found some of them pretty alarming.
Yeah.
Did any of them stand out to you?
Oh, yeah. One that really stuck with me, it was about how ransomware attacks have evolved. They even cite this case where a company, they were hit with this really nasty strain, and it didn't just encrypt their data, it got into their backup systems too.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and the attackers, they demanded a 7-figure ransom. And even after paying the company they could only get back about 60% of their data.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, it took them months to even rebuild their systems.
Yeah.
And their reputation, I don't think it ever fully recovered.
Wow. That's really scary. And it's not just about like the immediate money hit either, right? Think about all the lost productivity, the disruption to their business, all the potential legal problems. That's got to be a nightmare.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Keeps you up at night,
For sure. And then on top of that, there's the reputational damage. News of a data breach, it spreads so fast nowadays. And consumers I think they're getting smarter about data privacy. So they're pretty quick to ditch companies if they don't think they're taking it seriously.
Well, yeah, totally.
And speaking of data privacy, they actually specifically mention in the document Brazil's data protection law.
Oh, the LGPTD.
Yeah, they emphasize that if you don't comply, you could be looking at some pretty big fines, like up to 50 million reais.
Oh, that's a lot. Yeah, it's serious. That's a big motivator to really get your security act together,
Yeah. So this is where Lumos LLC comes in, right? They present themselves as the partner to help businesses sort through all of these challenges. And what I thought was interesting was that, they don't just focus on the techie side of cybersecurity. They actually it seems like they take a more holistic approach.
Right. Yeah, they go beyond just setting up your firewalls, or your antivirus software. They talk about vulnerability assessments, policy development, incident response planning, employee training, all that. It's a much broader view of what cybersecurity actually is.
Yeah, for sure. So they recognize that security isn't just about technology, but it's about people, processes, the culture.
Absolutely.
And they really hit hard on the importance of being proactive with security. Stuff like penetration testing. And they even mentioned some of the specific frameworks they use, like OWASP, which, could you break that down for us a little? What is that and how does it work with penetration testing?
Sure. OWASP, it stands for Open Web Application Security Project. And it's a nonprofit. They focus on web application security, like making it better. They've got like a ton of resources. One thing they have is a list of like the top 10 web application security risks, the worst ones. And they update it all the time. So Lumos uses that framework and others too to kind of simulate real world attacks. So they can find vulnerabilities in the client's systems, before a hacker finds them.
So it's like a stress test for your security.
Yeah, I guess you could say that. And the nice thing is, a framework like OWASP, it's always evolving. It keeps up with the latest threats and vulnerabilities. So when you work with a company like Lumos, you're not just getting their knowledge, you're tapping into like a whole community of security professionals, people who are constantly sharing what they know.
Right. So it's kind of like they're always one step ahead of the bad guys, so to speak.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. So we've talked about the risks, we've talked about some of the solutions, but what are the benefits of actually going with a company like Lumos?
Well, they actually lay out a few key points that, I think would resonate with anyone running a business.
Okay, so like what?
first, they talk about the advantage of being proactive about security, how it can actually make you more competitive. Because in today's market, people care about data privacy, right? And they're much more likely to go with a company that seems secure and trustworthy.
So it's not just about preventing something bad from happening, but it's actually you can use security as a selling point.
Exactly. And then there's also the peace of mind, having experts there to back you up. Because cybersecurity, it can be really complex, and most companies, they don't have the resources to handle it themselves.
Right.
So by working with Lumos, they can let their teams focus on what they're good at and know that their security's taken care of.
It's like having a whole security team on call, basically 24/7.
Right. Exactly. And then they also talk about building a culture of security, within the company, because they point out that human error, it's still a huge factor in a lot of security breaches. So they actually offer training to teach employees about the newest threats and how to stay safe online.
Yeah, I almost fell for one of those phishing scams just last week. It looked so real.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But something showed off, so I double-checked the sender's address, and it turned out to be fake. It's amazing how good they've gotten, how sophisticated those attacks are.
It really is. And that's why, ongoing training, it's so important.
Yeah.
Because it's not enough to just tell people about security once,
Yeah.
You have to keep reminding them and give them the latest information.
And Lumos can help with that too.
Absolutely. They've got all sorts of training programs, all designed to do exactly that.
Okay, so it sounds like they've got all the bases covered.
They do. And one more thing they emphasize is always improving, because the threats are constantly changing. So they're committed to staying ahead of the game and making sure their strategies can handle the newest challenges.
Right, that's got to be reassuring.
Yeah. So we've, covered a lot. We talked about the risks, the solutions, and the advantages of partnering with, someone like Lumos. But the real question is, how do they put all of this into action? Like, how do they go from theory to actually helping businesses implement these security measures?
That's a great point. And it kind of leads us into the next part of this deep dive. They talk about these key security frameworks, the foundations of their approach. Want to break those down a little bit?
Yeah. Let's do it.
Okay. Are you ready to ignite your digital transformation journey? Lumos LLC is here to guide your business through the ever-changing digital landscape.
Whether you're tackling Brazil's LGPD data protection challenges, fortifying your systems with robust cybersecurity, or ensuring your operations never miss a beat with top-tier backup and disaster recovery services,
Lumos LLC has the expertise you need.
We're also leading the way in bridging the gap between OT and IT, ensuring seamless integration on the shop floor and in industrial manufacturing.
Stay ahead of the curve and power your future with confidence.
For more information, visit www.lumos-llc.com or connect with us on LinkedIn and YouTube.
Lumos LLC, lighting the way to your digital future. So we're back and ready to get into how Lumos actually approaches cybersecurity. They mentioned 4 kind of key frameworks: ISO 27701, the NIST cybersecurity framework, CIS controls, and Cloud Security Alliance guidelines. But before we really, unpack those, I think it'd be helpful to see how these frameworks actually play out, like in real world situations.
Yeah, I agree. Actually, Lumos, they included a couple of case studies in this document, and they kind of illustrate what can happen if you don't pay attention to cybersecurity, and then the value of like a structured approach,
Yeah. Let's hear them.
Okay, so one case study, it focuses on this mid-sized retail company. And they had some basic security measures in place, but nothing, comprehensive. And they ended up getting hit with ransomware. It basically shut them down for almost a week. And, they had to pay a lot of money to get their data back. Plus, it really hurt their reputation. They lost customers, all that.
So it wasn't just the immediate financial hit, but the long-term damage to their business.
Exactly. And the thing is, a lot of the things that led to the attack, they could have been avoided if they had taken security more seriously, been more proactive.
Like what kind of things?
Well, like they hadn't implemented multi-factor authentication for their employees. So, once the attackers got one password, they were in. And they also didn't do regular vulnerability assessments. So they didn't even realize they had security flaws in their software.
So it sounds like they were making kind of the classic mistakes, huh? Underestimating security and not taking care of basic vulnerabilities.
Yeah, pretty much. And Lumos uses these case studies to really drive home the point of having a multi-layered security approach, something that combines the technical stuff like safeguards with policies and employee training.
Right. And that's where these frameworks come in, right? They provide a roadmap for building a solid security program.
Exactly. So let's start with ISO 27001. It's an international standard. It's for information security management systems. It gives you a framework for setting up, implementing, maintaining, and constantly improving an ISMS.
Wow, that sounds pretty comprehensive. What are the main things it covers?
Oh, it covers a ton of stuff. Risk management, asset management, access control, how to deal with incidents, compliance, all of it. Basically, it helps organizations figure out their information security risks, implement controls, and then track how well they're working, over time.
So it's not just about setting up a bunch of security tools. It's about having a system, a way to manage security across the whole organization.
Exactly.
Okay. Now the NIST cybersecurity framework, that's a little different, right?
Yeah. So the NIST framework, it's voluntary. It was developed by the National Institute of Standards and Technology in the US, and it's more for helping organizations, no matter how big or small, manage and reduce their cyber risk.
So how is it different from ISO 27001?
Well, ISO 27001, it's all about establishing a full ISMS. But the NIST framework, it's a bit more flexible. It's more about what you're trying to achieve. It focuses on identifying, protecting, detecting, responding to, and recovering from cyber incidents.
So it's more about what you do to reduce risk rather than the specific systems you have in place.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It's about knowing your own risks, the ones that are specific to you, and having a plan to deal with them.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, what about those CIS controls? Those sound, I don't know, a bit more straightforward.
Yeah, they are. So the Center for Internet Security, they came up with a set of security controls, and they're supposed to help prevent the most common cyber attacks. They're based on real-world data, what's actually happening, and they give you a clear plan to improve your security.
So it's like a cheat sheet for cybersecurity, like the essential stuff.
Exactly. It tells you the most important things to focus on to make yourself less of a target,
And lastly, we have the Cloud Security Alliance guidelines. These are obviously super important nowadays with, everyone using the cloud.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So the Cloud Security Alliance, they're a global organization, and they're all about defining best practices, raising awareness of how to secure cloud computing. Their guidelines, they cover everything. Data security, identity management, incident response, compliance, the whole 9 yards.
So whether you're on AWS or Azure or Google Cloud, these guidelines can help you keep your cloud environment safe.
Exactly. And what I find interesting is that Lumos, they don't say this one framework is the best, use this one. They say it really depends on the client, what they need, what their risks are.
So they might recommend different frameworks together or, tailor their approach to a specific industry or even the regulations in that area.
Exactly. It's all about finding the right mix of tools and strategies to make sure you have a security program that actually works.
That's a smart approach. It recognizes that, no two organizations are the same, right? Everyone has different challenges. Now, I'm curious, how does Lumos go about actually helping businesses implement these frameworks? It's one thing to understand them, but putting them into practice, that's got to be tough.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it leads us perfectly into the last part of our deep dive. We're going to look at Lumos's recommendations and how they translate into real steps that businesses can take.
Sounds good to me. Let's get into it. Okay, so we've really dug deep into this whole cybersecurity thing with Lumos, right? We've looked at the risks, the solutions they offer, all these frameworks. But I'm sure our listeners are thinking, okay, this is all interesting, but what am I supposed to actually do with this?
Yeah, that's the big question, right? And the good news is Lumos gives us some concrete steps to take. Things businesses can start doing, no matter their size or industry.
So let's get to the point then. What's the first step?
Well, you got to start with a solid risk assessment. It's like, taking stock of everything digital you've got, figuring out what's most important, and then what threats you're facing. Can't really build a defense if you don't know what you're defending, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right.
But how do you even do a risk assessment? Sounds kind of intimidating.
It can be, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially if you're on your own. And that's where Lumos, they can really help. They have experts who can come in and do a full assessment, look at your systems, your policies, even how your employees work.
So they don't just give you a checklist and say, figure it out.
No, not at all. They walk you through it, help you find those weaknesses, figure out which risks are the biggest, and then make a plan to deal with them.
Okay, so let's say you've done the risk assessment. You know what your weak spots are. What's next?
Then it's time to build up your defenses. Lumos talks about, having multiple layers. So you're combining technical stuff with policy-based controls.
Okay, so what are some examples of the technical stuff?
Well, you've got your usual suspects, right? Firewalls, intrusion detection systems, strong passwords, multi-factor authentication. But they also talk about things like encrypting your data, using tools to scan for vulnerabilities, and setting up what's called a SIEM system to keep an eye on security logs.
It sounds like a lot to juggle.
It can be, yeah. That's why Lumos says it's so important to pick the right tools, the ones that fit your needs. They can help you figure that out, make sure you're not wasting money on stuff you don't need.
Right. And what about those policy-based controls? What do those do?
So policies, think of them like the rules of the road for cybersecurity. They set clear guidelines for, who can access data, how it's used, how it's protected. Things like access control, data encryption, what to do if there's an incident, and really important employee training programs.
So it's not just about the tech itself, but the people using it,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Lumos really hammers home that point about having a culture of security in the company. They say, even if you've got the best tech in the world, human error can still mess everything up.
I was reading about this company just the other day that got hacked because an employee clicked on a phishing link and gave away their login. It's scary how, one mistake can have huge consequences.
It really is. And that's why, training, it can't be a one-time thing. You got to keep it going, keep everyone updated on what the latest scams are.
Yeah. And Lumos can help with that too.
Oh, yeah. They have a whole bunch of programs, not just teaching the basics, but even simulating phishing attacks so people can learn how to spot them, in a safe environment.
That's smart. It's not just telling people what to do, but actually letting them practice.
Right. Exactly.
One thing that really struck me reading through this Lumos document was their emphasis on constant improvement. It's not a set it and forget it kind of thing, is it?
Nope, not at all. They talk about regular security checks, vulnerability scans, penetration testing, basically always looking for weaknesses in your defenses, making sure they still hold up.
Sounds almost like you got to be paranoid about it.
Maybe a little. But when it comes to cybersecurity, a bit of paranoia isn't a bad thing. You got to assume someone's always trying to get in and be ready to adapt.
And that's where a partner like Lumos can be so helpful, right? They're the ones keeping up with the latest threats, figuring out new techniques, and then sharing all that with their clients.
Exactly. It's not just like buying a product. It's more like, an ongoing relationship, working together to keep your business safe.
So if there's the business owner listening right now, what's the one thing you want them to take away from all of this?
I'd say, remember this. Cybersecurity, it's not just a cost, it's an investment. You're investing in protecting your data, your reputation, your customers, and ultimately, that's how you protect your bottom line.
Yeah, it's an investment that pays off in so many ways, right? Not just avoiding the bad stuff, but building trust, getting ahead of the competition, and just having peace of mind.
Absolutely.
So we've covered a lot, haven't we? The risks, the solutions, how to be proactive and strategic about cybersecurity. But before we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about.
All right, go for it.
All of this, it's not just for businesses, it's for everyone, Think about your own digital life, your passwords, your online banking, your social media. Are you doing the same things to protect your information that businesses do?
That's a really good point. We tend to think of cybersecurity as like a company problem, but really, we're all at risk.
Exactly. So take a minute, think about your own habits online. Are your passwords strong? Are you using two-factor authentication? Do you know how to spot a phishing scam?
Being informed, that's how you stay in control. And in cybersecurity, that's more important than ever. So stay informed, stay vigilant, and stay safe out there.
And that wraps up our deep dive into cybersecurity with Lumos LLC. We hope you found it useful, interesting, and maybe even, a little encouraging.
Thanks for listening.
Until next time, keep learning.